How does a man who dedicates his life to preaching love and redemption become the architect of betrayal and tragedy? How does a promise to protect and cherish transform into an unspeakable act of deceit? And what happens when the very hands that bless you on Sunday are the same hands that bury the truth? Before you drop your comment, listen closely as the layers of this story are revealed, and decide for yourself, who is to be blamed. It's October 18, 2023, 7:45 a.m. The quiet streets of Jackson Heights, Queens, are alive with an unusual tension. Outside a modest brownstone, detectives gather, their faces set with grim determination. Shovels pierced the cold morning earth in the backyard of a home that once belonged to Pastor Darnell Robinson, a man beloved by his congregation, a man whose words of faith inspired hope and trust. But today, the only words spoken are orders barked by investigators as they uncover a secret buried far deeper than anyone could have imagined. Beneath a meticulously constructed fire pit lies the remains of Layla Robinson, the wife of the pastor, a woman thought to have vanished without a trace 5 years earlier. He was a man of faith, a leader, a voice of guidance for his community. Pastor Darnell Robinson preached sermons that moved hearts and stirred souls. But behind the image of righteousness lay a story that would shock even his most loyal followers. This is not just a story of murder. It is a story of promises broken, trust destroyed, and a man who traded his moral compass for greed and betrayal. It wasn't prayers or psalms that filled the Robinson home on this fateful day, it was the haunting sound of shovels breaking through soil, each strike pulling back the veil on a life of lies. In the heart of Jackson Heights, beneath the vibrant noise of a bustling neighborhood, this love story turned into a nightmare. The discovery would expose not only a crime but the devastating truth about the man trusted by so many. This is the story of Pastor Darnell Robinson, his wife Layla, and the chilling truth buried beneath the surface of their marriage. At 10 a.m. on a typical Sunday morning in Jackson Heights, the voice of Pastor Darnell Robinson echoed through the packed pews of Grace Redeemer Baptist Church. His sermons were electric, full of passion, and laced with a charisma that drew people in. He was more than just a preacher, he was a beacon of hope for a congregation that relied on him to guide them through life's trials. In his sharp-tailored suits and with a Bible in hand, Pastor Robinson exuded authority and compassion. He wasn't just admired, he was revered. Young men sought his mentorship, troubled families sought his counsel, and women often whispered among themselves about his eloquence and charm. Darnell's ministry wasn't confined to the pulpit. He worked tirelessly with troubled youth, offering programs that kept teenagers off the streets and gave them a sense of purpose. His name was synonymous with community service, faith, and leadership. But behind every great man is often someone even greater. Layla Robinson, his wife of 12 years, was that someone. Layla, 36, was everything the church admired in a pastor's wife, kind, soft-spoken, and tirelessly devoted to her family and the congregation. As an elementary school teacher, she was a role model to her students, teaching not just academic lessons but lessons in kindness and integrity. Layla was the first to arrive at church on Sunday mornings, ensuring the choir was ready and the pews were spotless. She organized food drives, counseled struggling couples, and stood by Darnell's side as his most loyal supporter. Together, they were seen as the perfect couple, a union blessed by God Himself. But no one knew what lay beyond the polished smiles and coordinated Sunday outfits. Their story began 15 years earlier at a church retreat in upstate New York. Darnell, then a fiery young minister just starting his career, had captivated the room with his booming voice and unshakable confidence. Layla, attending the retreat with her church choir, had caught his eye immediately. Their courtship was the stuff of fairy tales, or at least it seemed that way. Late-night prayer calls turned into long conversations about their dreams. Darnell envisioned leading a congregation one day, while Layla dreamed of nurturing young minds as a teacher. They bonded over their shared values, their faith, and their desire to make the world a better place. It wasn't long before Darnell proposed, presenting Layla with a modest diamond ring during a sunrise service on Easter Sunday. Their wedding was a joyous celebration of love and faith. The couple's vows, delivered in front of family and friends, were full of promises to love, honor, and cherish. For years, it seemed they had kept those promises. Darnell's ministry grew, his congregation expanded, and Grace Redeemer Baptist Church became a cornerstone of the Jackson Heights community. Layla, too, thrived in her role as both a teacher and a pastor's wife. They hosted marriage retreats, led Bible studies, and became the go-to couple for advice on faith and relationships. But as their influence grew, so did the pressures. Financial strain began to creep into the church as donations dwindled and maintenance costs soared. Darnell's ambition to grow the ministry into a multi-campus church put a strain on their resources, and on their marriage. Layla began to notice changes in Darnell. His once unwavering optimism gave way to frustration. He spent long hours at the church, often coming home late without explanation. When she questioned him, his answers were curt, dismissive. In the privacy of their home, their once loving conversations turned into tense arguments. Layla, ever the peacemaker, tried to reach out, but Darnell seemed increasingly distant. And then there was the matter of the money. Layla, who handled the household finances, noticed discrepancies in their accounts, large withdrawals that Darnell couldn't seem to explain. At first, she believed his excuses, expenses for church renovations, unexpected repairs. But as the months went on, her doubts began to grow. Beyond the financial strain, there was something else. Layla's once unshakable faith in her husband began to waver. He had always been the man who could calm a storm with his words, but now, there was a storm brewing within their own home, one that even he couldn't quiet. Layla started pulling back, reclaiming parts of herself that had been overshadowed by her role as a pastor's wife. She attended professional development workshops for teachers, reconnected with old friends, and spent less time at the church. Darnell noticed. And he didn't like it. The man who had once been her greatest supporter now seemed resentful of her independence. Their arguments grew more frequent, more intense. Neighbors in their tightly packed Jackson Heights neighborhood began noticing the raised voices behind the Robinsons' closed doors. Yet on Sunday mornings, none of this was visible. The Robinsons maintained their polished facade, standing side by side in the church as the perfect couple. For the congregation, they were still the embodiment of faith and love. But for Layla, cracks were beginning to show, and she was starting to see a side of Darnell that she hadn't seen before. While the congregation sang hymns and lifted their hands in worship, Layla began to wonder if the man standing beside her at the pulpit was the same man she had married. And Darnell? For him, the pressure to maintain the perfect image was mounting. His ministry, his reputation, his marriage, everything he had built was beginning to feel like it could slip away. For a man used to being in control, the thought of losing it all was something he couldn't bear. And when faced with losing his marriage, his influence, and his carefully constructed life, Darnell would make a choice that would forever change the lives of everyone around him. October 12, 2018, began like any other Sunday for the congregation of Grace Redeemer Baptist Church. It was a day of fellowship, prayer, and worship, a day when the Robinsons were always at the heart of the service. But that morning, something was different. Layla Robinson, the ever-reliable pastor's wife, was nowhere to be seen. Her absence was noted by more than a few in the congregation, but explanations came quickly. Pastor Darnell Robinson assured his flock that Layla was simply running late, an unusual but plausible excuse. Later that evening, however, the story took a darker turn. When Layla failed to return home or show up at her teaching job the next morning, alarms began to sound. Her friends, colleagues, and congregation grew increasingly concerned. By that evening, Darnell stood in front of local news cameras, his face a mask of grief and worry, pleading for her safe return. "Layla, if you're out there, please know we're looking for you. Come back home to us," he said, his voice trembling as tears rolled down his face. The image of the grieving pastor struck a chord with the community, mobilizing them to action. Flyers with Layla's smiling face were plastered on lampposts and store windows. Church members organized search parties, combing through the streets and nearby parks. Her colleagues at the elementary school she loved so much reached out to students and parents, hoping for any clue about her whereabouts. But for some, Darnell's public sorrow didn't ring entirely true. He claimed that on the morning of her disappearance, they had left their homes separately. According to his statement, he had driven to the church early to prepare for the Sunday service, leaving Layla behind as she rushed to get ready. She was supposed to follow him in her own car, but she never arrived. At first glance, his explanation seemed reasonable. But for those who knew the Robinsons well, there were whispers of unease. They were always together on Sunday mornings, one church member later recalled. Layla would never miss a service without good reason, and she wouldn't have gone anywhere without telling someone. The whispers soon grew louder. Neighbors began sharing stories of recent arguments overheard through the walls of their tightly packed brownstone neighborhood. Some recounted hearing raised voices late into the night, just days before Layla's disappearance. Still, the community rallied behind their pastor, trusting in the man who had always been their moral compass. But the longer Layla stayed missing, the more questions arose. 3 days later, Layla's silver Honda Civic was discovered in a parking lot near LaGuardia Airport. It was locked, with no visible signs of foul play. Detectives scoured the car for evidence, but what they found was frustratingly little. Her purse was gone, her phone was turned off, and there were no signs of struggle. The location raised even more questions. Why would Layla leave her car there? Was it possible she had boarded a flight, leaving her life behind? Or was the car left there deliberately to throw investigators off the trail? Pastor Robinson publicly mourned this grim development, calling on his congregation to pray for clarity and strength. But in private, the cracks in his story began to show. Detectives noticed inconsistencies in his timeline. Why had he waited nearly 24 hours to report Layla missing? Why had he deleted several text messages from his phone, messages sent to Layla in the hours leading up to her disappearance? For now, though, these questions remained unanswered. Without concrete evidence, the investigation stalled. The police issued public statements, urging anyone with information to come forward. News outlets covered the case extensively, broadcasting images of Layla's warm smile and heartfelt pleas from Darnell. But as days turned into weeks, leads dried up, and the case began to slip from the headlines. To the world, it seemed that Layla Robinson had vanished without a trace. But for those who paid close attention, there were troubling signs that her disappearance wasn't as simple as it seemed. "Something about the way he talks, it just doesn't sit right with me," a neighbor quietly confided to investigators. "I know he's a pastor, but even pastors can have secrets." And secrets, it seemed, were starting to surface. As the community's hope began to wane, whispers of discord in the Robinson household grew louder. Church members recalled moments when Layla's smile seemed forced, when her laughter rang hollow. "They looked perfect on the outside," said one deacon. "But now I wonder how much of that was real." The once revered pastor's reputation remained intact, for now. But for those who had loved Layla, doubt lingered. For detectives, one thing was clear: without new evidence, the case was growing cold. The missing persons file remained open, but progress slowed to a halt. The congregation continued to pray, but for some, the image of Pastor Robinson leading those prayers began to feel unsettling. And as the world moved on, one question remained unanswered: where was Layla Robinson? By the time the first anniversary of Layla Robinson's disappearance came and went, the congregation of Grace Redeemer Baptist Church was still reeling from her absence. The sermons grew quieter, the prayers more solemn, and the pews held an unspoken grief. But for Pastor Darnell Robinson, life appeared to be moving forward. Less than a year after Layla vanished, whispers began to spread through the congregation. Darnell had been seen out more frequently, not alone, but in the company of Simone Harris, a boutique owner and a longtime member of the church. Simone was everything Layla wasn't. Where Layla had been calm and steady, Simone was vibrant and bold. She had a knack for drawing attention, whether through her sharp sense of style or her infectious laugh. At 31, she carried a youthful energy that seemed to spark something in Darnell. Their relationship quickly became the talk of the congregation. At first, the pair tried to keep things discreet, but in a community as close-knit as Jackson Heights, secrets have a way of slipping out. Just 9 months after Layla's disappearance, the news broke: Pastor Darnell Robinson was engaged. For the congregation, the announcement was a shock. Some were delighted, eager to see their pastor find happiness again after such a devastating loss. But others were uneasy. It felt too soon, one church member later recalled. Layla was barely gone, and now he's talking about a wedding. The wedding itself was a small, private affair. Darnell and Simone exchanged vows in an intimate ceremony held in the same sanctuary where he had once married Layla. For some, the image of Darnell standing at the same altar with another woman was too much to bear. Simone moved into the Robinsons' home shortly after the wedding. She brought her own touches to the house, redecorating rooms and planting flowers in the front yard. But in the backyard, the changes were far more significant. Darnell began a major renovation project, transforming the space where he and Layla had once shared quiet moments of prayer and reflection. He told neighbors he wanted to create a sanctuary for contemplation, a peaceful retreat where he and Simone could host church gatherings. A fire pit was built in the center of the yard, surrounded by neatly planted trees and decorative stonework. Darnell worked tirelessly, often late into the night, overseeing every detail of the construction. But for those who lived nearby, the project raised questions. He was always out there after dark, said one neighbor. Digging, measuring, pouring concrete. It didn't seem normal. Church members noticed, too. It just didn't sit right with me, one deacon admitted. Why was he so focused on that backyard? And why now, so soon after Layla? The whispers began again, this time louder than before. Some speculated that Darnell was trying to erase all traces of his former life with Layla. Others wondered if there was something more sinister at play. As the fire pit took shape, its purpose became clear to those closest to Darnell. It wasn't just a decorative addition, it was a statement. A way to mark a new chapter in his life, one free of the burdens and memories tied to Layla. But what Darnell didn't realize was that his carefully crafted new life was already beginning to crack. The questions, the doubts, the unease, they were all growing. While others mourned, Pastor Darnell moved on. His new wife, Simone, brought a fresh energy to his life. But as they celebrated new beginnings, the shadow of Layla remained, buried in the backyard they now shared. And soon, those shadows would come to light. How long can a secret stay buried? Days? Months? Years? What happens when the weight of the truth becomes too much for someone to bear? September 3, 2023, at precisely 9:32 p.m., an anonymous tip came through to the NYPD's hotline. The voice on the other end was calm, deliberate, and devastatingly clear. I saw him. I saw Pastor Robinson digging in his backyard the night Layla disappeared. He was out there for hours. Whatever he buried, it wasn't just dirt. The call sent shockwaves through the precinct. For detectives who had watched Layla Robinson's case grow cold, it was the first tangible lead in years. Within days, armed with the information from the tipster, investigators compiled enough evidence to request a search warrant for Pastor Darnell Robinson's property. On the early morning of October 18, 2023, 7:45 a.m. a convoy of police vehicles descended on the Robinson home in Jackson Heights. The streets were quiet as officers from the NYPD's Major Crimes Division approached the brownstone, warrant in hand. Simone Harris, Pastor Robinson's second wife, opened the door, her expression shifting from confusion to alarm as detectives explained the nature of their visit. Behind her, the once cozy home she and Darnell had shared now felt heavy with tension. But the police weren't interested in the pristine living room or the immaculate kitchen. Their focus lay beyond the sliding glass doors, on the backyard where a fire pit stood as the centerpiece of the Robinsons' carefully landscaped garden. With the warrant granted by a Queens County judge, detectives began their search. They moved methodically, deploying ground-penetrating radar across the yard. Within minutes, the device detected irregularities beneath the fire pit. Officers marked the area, their grim determination palpable as shovels were brought in. The work was slow, deliberate. Each layer of soil peeled back revealed the truth that had lain hidden for 5 years. Finally, they hit something, a tarp, tightly wrapped and sealed with industrial adhesive. "You could feel the air change when we uncovered it," one detective later recalled. "We all knew what we had found before we even opened it." Inside the tarp were human remains, later identified as Layla Robinson through dental records and DNA analysis. The beloved teacher, the pastor's first wife, had been buried mere steps from where Darnell and Simone had built their new life. The discovery wasn't just shocking, it was damning. Detectives immediately secured the scene, treating it as the epicenter of a homicide investigation. The fire pit that had once been a symbol of Darnell's fresh start was now a crime scene, a stark reminder of betrayal, greed, and calculated deception. In the days that followed, forensic specialists meticulously examined the remains and the surrounding soil. Their findings told a chilling story. Layla had died from a single gunshot wound to the back of the head, execution style. The bullet's trajectory indicated that she had likely been seated or kneeling at the time of her death. The forensic team also matched the tarp and adhesive to materials purchased from. Receipts recovered from Darnell's bank records confirmed the purchases. Surveillance footage from a nearby store showed him calmly loading industrial adhesive, tarp, and bags of concrete into the trunk of his car. Neighbors, too, began to recall the strange late-night activity in the Robinson backyard during those weeks in 2018. "He was always out there with a shovel," one neighbor recounted. "At the time, I thought he was just doing some gardening or fixing something. I had no idea what he was really up to." Simone, now at the center of the media frenzy, insisted she had no knowledge of Layla's remains being buried on the property. She told detectives she had trusted her husband completely and never questioned the renovations he had undertaken shortly after their wedding. For the NYPD, the evidence was mounting, and the picture it painted was grim. Pastor Darnell Robinson, the charismatic man who had guided his congregation through life's storms, was now the primary suspect in a murder investigation. "What we found that day wasn't just a body," said one detective. "It was the unraveling of a lie that had been carefully constructed and ruthlessly maintained for 5 years." As the remains were transported to the coroner's office, the police moved swiftly to secure an arrest warrant for Darnell. The discovery marked a turning point, not just for the investigation but for the community that had placed its unwavering trust in the pastor. Layla Robinson's disappearance was no longer a mystery. It was now a homicide. And as the search for justice began in earnest, one question lingered: how many more secrets had Pastor Darnell Robinson buried alongside the truth? On a crisp October morning, just as the congregation of Grace Redeemer Baptist Church prepared for a Sunday service of hymns and prayers, their pastor, Darnell Robinson, faced an entirely different reckoning. At 10:45 a.m., detectives entered the church with a warrant in hand. In the midst of the sermon, they walked down the aisle, past the pews filled with his faithful followers, and placed Darnell under arrest. The congregation gasped as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. This was their leader, the man who had baptized their children, married their loved ones, and comforted them in their darkest hours. Now, he was being led away by officers, accused of a crime that shattered the very foundation of their faith. The man who preached about salvation now faced judgment, not from God, but from the justice system. As the days turned into weeks, the courtroom became the stage for one of Jackson Heights' most sensational trials. Journalists lined the benches, eager to capture every twist and turn of a case that had gripped the community. The prosecution wasted no time building their case, methodically unraveling the image of Pastor Robinson as a moral and righteous man. Instead, they painted a damning portrait of greed, betrayal, and premeditation. Prosecutors presented evidence of Darnell's financial motives. They detailed his mounting debts, the declining donations to his church, and the $500,000 life insurance policy on Layla, a policy he had conveniently made himself the sole beneficiary of just months before her disappearance. Prosecutors laid bare Darnell's sins, a failing ministry, mounting debts, and a life insurance policy that became his salvation. Receipts and surveillance footage linked Darnell to the materials used to bury Layla's body: industrial adhesive, a tarp, and bags of concrete. Witnesses, including hardware store employees, identified him as the man who had purchased the items days after Layla vanished. Then there was the affair. Simone Harris, now Darnell's wife, took the stand in a dramatic turn of events. Her testimony was both compelling and heartbreaking. She described Darnell as charming and attentive during the early days of their relationship but revealed how his behavior had changed over time. "At first, he made me feel special, like I was the only person in the world who mattered," Simone told the court. "But after a while, he became controlling. He'd get angry if I asked about Layla or the backyard renovations. He'd say things like, 'Some questions are better left unanswered.' I thought he was just grieving, but now I know he was hiding something." Simone recounted cryptic comments Darnell had made about Layla's disappearance. One evening, as they sat by the fire pit in their backyard, he had said, "Sometimes people have to disappear for the rest of us to move on." At the time, she had dismissed it as a strange remark from a man struggling with loss. Now, those words haunted her. But Simone wasn't the only one to cast doubt on Darnell's actions. The construction workers who had built the fire pit in Darnell's backyard also took the stand. Their testimony added a chilling layer of detail to the prosecution's case. "He was very particular about how he wanted it done," one worker testified. "He kept insisting on the depth, saying it had to be deeper than usual. At the time, I didn't think much of it. He said it was for drainage." Another worker recounted Darnell's insistence on overseeing the work personally, even offering them bonuses to ensure the job was finished quickly. "He was out there the whole time, watching us," the worker said. "It felt odd, but he was paying, so we didn't question it. Now, I wish I had." Their testimonies painted a vivid picture of a man meticulously planning the concealment of his crime, using the fire pit as both a literal and symbolic cover for his actions. The prosecution's narrative was clear: Darnell had killed Layla to escape his failing marriage, solve his financial problems, and make way for his new life with Simone. But the defense wasn't without its own strategy. Darnell's lawyer painted him as a victim of circumstance, a man overwhelmed by debt and the pressures of leadership. They argued that the evidence was circumstantial and pointed to the lack of eyewitnesses or direct proof tying him to Layla's murder. Still, the weight of the evidence in Simone's testimony proved difficult to overcome. Forensic experts testified about the condition of Layla's remains, confirming that she had died from a single gunshot wound to the back of the head, a deliberate, execution-style killing. They matched the bullet to a firearm registered to Darnell, further cementing his guilt. The trial was a spectacle, with every revelation stirring both outrage and heartbreak. The Congregation of Grace Redeemer Baptist Church, once united in their faith, found themselves divided. Some still clung to the belief in Darnell's innocence, while others grappled with the reality that the man they had trusted most was capable of such a heinous act. In her closing arguments, the prosecutor left the jury with a chilling question: this is not just a case of murder. It's a case of betrayal, of a man who preached love and salvation while committing the ultimate sin. If Darnell Robinson can bury the truth about his wife, what else has he hidden? The courtroom fell silent as the jury left to deliberate. And while the trial had laid bare the sins of Pastor Robinson, one truth remained: for Layla, there could be no redemption, no second chance. Justice was the only salvation left to seek. November 2023, marked the end of a trial that had captivated Jackson Heights and beyond. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back in, their expressions somber, their decision final. The foreperson stood, and in a clear voice delivered the words that would forever seal the fate of Pastor Darnell Robinson, guilty of first-degree murder. The sentence was swift and unforgiving, life in prison without the possibility of parole. For the man who had spent decades preaching about redemption, salvation was no longer an option. For Pastor Robinson, the pulpit became a prison cell. His congregation, once united by faith, now divided by betrayal. The verdict sent shockwaves through the community. Members of Grace Redeemer Baptist Church, who had once looked to Darnell as a pillar of moral guidance, now faced the painful realization that they had been deceived. "How could he do this?" one congregant said through tears. "He preached about love and forgiveness, but he took Layla's life and tried to erase her like she didn't matter." For others, the betrayal cut even deeper. "He didn't just fail his family, he failed all of us," a deacon admitted. "We trusted him. We believed in him. And he used that trust to cover up his sins." But while the community grappled with its collective grief and anger, Layla's family took steps to ensure her memory would endure. Layla wasn't just a victim, her sister, Carmen Robinson, said during the sentencing hearing. She was a teacher, a wife, a daughter, and a friend. Her life was about helping others, and we want to honor that. In the weeks following the trial, the Robinson family launched the Layla Foundation, an organization dedicated to supporting victims of domestic abuse and raising awareness about the warning signs of toxic relationships. If Layla's story can save even one person, then her legacy will be one of hope, not tragedy, Carmen said. For the congregation of Grace Redeemer Baptist Church, healing would be a long and difficult journey. The once thriving church lost many of its members, its community fractured by the scandal. But for those who stayed, the message was clear: faith must be placed in principles, not just in people. As the courtroom doors closed on Pastor Robinson's fate, the story of Layla Robinson left behind questions far more profound than the trial itself. How does a man who preaches love commit the ultimate act of hate? How can someone hide such darkness behind a facade of light? And what does this say about the human capacity for deception? For Darnell Robinson, the lies he buried along with Layla eventually came to light. His actions tore apart a family, a congregation, and a community. But in the end, they couldn't bury the truth. Layla's life was stolen, her voice silenced. But her story now echoes in the halls of justice, the hearts of her loved ones, and the efforts of those who fight for victims like her. What do you think? Can we ever truly know the people we trust the most? And where do we draw the line between faith and hypocrisy, love and control, trust and deceit? Is it Darnell Robinson, the man who betrayed his vows, his faith, and his community? The pastor who wielded his charisma like a weapon, using trust as a shield for his crimes? Or does the blame lie deeper, within a system that allowed power to go unchecked, a congregation that placed blind faith in a man rather than the principles he preached? Can blame be shared with Simone Harris, the new wife who overlooked the unsettling signs, dismissed cryptic remarks, and enjoyed a life built on deception? Or was she, too, a victim, manipulated and controlled by a man who had long perfected the art of hiding his sins? So, who do you think is to be blamed? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And remember, the stories we tell are not just about the past, they are lessons for the future. And if you found this story compelling, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories like this one. Because while the truth may sometimes take years to uncover, it's a journey worth taking together.